Welcome back to a bit Gamey and video on how farming started, or at least my guess as to how farming started. So starting at the beginning, you got the last glacial maximum 24,000 years ago, where as you can see there's a lot of ice. So ice up there, tundra, blah blah blah, prairie steppe there, and little bits of vegetation clinging to the edges around the Mediterranean. So not a lot of farming possible. And in theory anyway, the populations are all stuck down on the what are called refugia, refugia, like in that little bit there between between Italy and the Balkans, in that bit of sea there, and down like in the mouth of like the Nile region, and at the other end of the Nile, not the Nile, sorry, the Tigris Euphrates, in the Persian Gulf. So these little spots where whatever humans there were kind of collected together, and these usually in wetlands, usually in the land that was that eventually got flooded because it was the sea level was a lot lower, so they're in the particular spots in where it was marshland, but in the glacier times. So it's the places where you get lots of in the marshes next to the sea, so you can get lots of fish basically, and because fish are cold blooded, so they don't feel the cold. So you got the basic idea is you've got these little populations tucked away in little spots which have got some kind of protection of some kind. I mean, there are other things. There's a theory that you could have people on the edge of the ice further north, like living like Eskimos, getting foods from the fish pushed out into the Atlantic. And another theory that there's people who could have survived in the kind of prairie bits over here, of things like mammoth and stuff like that, because the animals are so huge. Because it's known now there's bits of Africa where there's elephants, and a tribe, if it kills an elephant, it can feed themselves off an elephant for like 2 months. So in theory, if there are people chasing after mammoth, they could kill one and just sit around for 2 months eating it, and then go after another one. So it's possible there's some people still out in the further north, either chasing mammoth over here or fish over here, but generally that's all hypothetical. And the bit that's known is the bits that are now underwater, which used to be refugia for those sort of kind of people. So yes, that's and it started getting warming up, or noticeably warming up about 16,000 years ago apparently. So 16,000 years ago, that's the kind of baseline for what's known. So you see at the beginning, 12,000 years ago, apparently, you got the deciduous trees, you got Greece and Crete, and a little bit on the southern edge. 10,000 years ago, it's spread got a bit warmer, and it's spreading out a bit more. 6,000 years ago, again, it's all gradually creeping up north, and then 2,000 years ago. So it's got this gradual warming process. That's the general gist. You've got the equator onwards, and they're gradually getting warmer over time. So get to the point where people are starting to spread out beyond those refugia. They were tucked in these little corners for a long time, and then they start to spread out. But currently they're all as hunter-gatherers. So they're wandering around, they're killing animals mostly, and grabbing sort of food from whatever kind of thing that grows nearby. And generally they're semi-nomadic, because if you sit down at one campsite in a particular spot, and you're going to a gathering, hunter gathering, and you're getting whatever animals are available and whatever plants are available, then you're going to use them up. So generally a little clan would have a territory, and then they make a camp in one place until everything's used up, and then they'll move on to another campsite and carry on like that. A bit like Native Americans with their teepees and wigwams sort of thing. And the key point, going to the key point, is a tribe they have a bunch of clans with their own territory, where they're kind of doing their semi-nomadic thing around their territory, and the way you connected with your tribe was through some kind of usually central religious location. And this crops up a bunch of times in later history, like with in Rome, and they're discussing or describing the Samnites. They'd have a kind of little tribal gathering place. And it wouldn't be a town or a city, because they don't grow enough food to support a town or a city. These clans are wandering around from place to place, getting just enough to eat. But they have this meeting place, and for things like for religious festivals and arranging marriages and stuff like that. Because a lot of times in the past, in these hunter-gatherer groups, like Australian Aborigines, have really, really strict rules about who you can marry to try and prevent inbreeding. So these clans have assuming they're the same as the Aborigines, they have these kind of complicated ways of deciding who you're allowed to get married to. So you've got these clans, and they move together into go and join at some religious centre, be a bit like Stonehenge or whatever. And so they have their religious centre, and they meet up there 3 or 4 times a year or whatever, a bit like a county fair or something like that, and arrange marriages and do legal arguments and stuff like that. And we have an example of one of these places as a place called Quebec Tepe, which I don't know if that's pronounced right, which is just there, if you can see, probably not. Quebec Tepe. So it's like just within the sort of Tigris Euphrates range, but that's maybe not because it was abandoned. So I'm assuming there are other places like Quebec Tepe all around here. All these little tribes and little collections of clans. I'm assuming they all had a place like Quebec themselves that was their kind of central meeting spot. The thing that's particularly interesting about Quebec Tepe is that they're assumed to be hunter-gatherers. They're hunter-gatherers. It wasn't a farming community. So it's a very extensive site with these kind of like what I call angels, but they're not. There's these T-shaped things. The striking thing about Quebec Tepe is that it was a hunter-gatherer. It's a pre-farming location. These things like these giant stone T-shaped things, the thing I call angels. And I say it's a religious site, but it wasn't a permanent settlement, apparently, or not generally. It's thought to be like a hunter-gatherer thing, where they kind of go up and meet up with all the different clans every now and then. But you can see this is a reconstruction of what it's supposed to. There's a whole bunch of these things. Where it looks, and say these big stone shapes with these kind of like guardian angel type structures. And say the thing is that this is pre-farming, centralized religious centres. I think in the kind of the central spot for tribes to gather and meet up. And so anyway, the presence of these central religious centres is how I think calming, how I think farming started. So imagine this is your tribal territory, and you've got a bunch of clans wandering around on their semi-nomadic gathering food, and a central location for religious ceremonies and rituals and marriages and law and all that of it. So you do that, and then at the same time, the Earth is gradually warming up from the equator upwards. So if your little tribe is in a place like up, in a desert or whatever, it doesn't really make any difference to you. But if you're in a good spot, like in Mesopotamia, and it gets warmer, and so there's more food to eat and more crops and more plants, rather not crops, and you happen to be living in a place where wild wheat is native, then you're going to collect the seeds from the wheat. It's just growing wild in different places, and you just go out and pick out all the seeds or whatever, and put it in a little bag, and you make bread out of it. So you do that, and then at the same time, when you're collecting wheat as a gatherer. At the same time, you have your little central location for for your tribal religious centre, and you have festivals or whatever 3 or 4 times a year. So when you're all traipsing off to your religious centre, and all gathering around on your site, a bit like Quebec Tepe, and you're all gathered around in your little clan groups. So it's like a giant camping site. So it's basically a giant camping site all around your religious centre, with people bringing seeds and then making whatever they made to eat out of those seeds. Then there's going to be a lot of spillage and or latrines, and it's all getting passed through. So you got your tribe gathering around your religious centre and basically planting wheat, not intentionally, but just through dropping it or putting it in latrines. And so over time, your religious centre gets covered in wheat. Your little hill or whatever, your holy hill, it's all covered in wheat. And so you start all sprouting, and gradually over time, your holy hill becomes your holy wheat hill. And when that's done, when it's turned into a holy wheat hill, you're going to start having some people going to live there permanently, like some priests. Or generally, I'm assuming they're going to be priests. So get these priests around your holy wheat hill, and gathering the wheat to live off. Probably doing a bit of hunting as well, or whatever. But generally, that becomes accidentally. That's my main point, really. I think farming started accidentally by people gathering around some holy site and dropping lots of wheat seeds into the ground. And again, in places where wheat didn't grow very well, it wouldn't matter. But in places where it did grow well, you created a sort of living, a sustenance for priests to show up. And so that's how I think it started. You start off with your little holy hill. It gets turned into a wheat producing hill through people just basically going to latrines, basically by accident. And then once you start getting a few priests living there, you start tending to the wheat, living off it basically. And once that gets going, you can you gradually start bringing artisans, to build your temple. So you have the priests building the temple, and these artisans will grow up around it. Potters and archers and spear makers and blacksmiths and whatever, all centered around the religious site, the temple. And so you can have a bunch of these. You need to be in a place where wheat will grow naturally. It's got to be the wild wheat has got to be there to start off with for this to work. That's why it sort of starts off in particular regions where which is just right in terms of climate to start with. Just warm enough for a good place for wheat to naturally to naturally grow, and it spreads out from there. And each of these little red circles here, Akkad, the Gash, Uruk, Eridu, etc. These represent those the centre point. One of these early tribal groups with a little, what was originally a kind of a sort of religious centre, which didn't have anyone living there because it was because they're really semi-nomadic. Once all the wheat has started to cover their little holy hill, they turn into a little beginning of a city-state. And that to me is why, when you read about the early history of this period, like in Mesopotamia and the Sumerians, etc., why I think all their kind of when they talk about and that's why I think when you read the histories of Sumeria and such like that, it's why it's all the temples, or all the city-states seem to be based around the particular gods and be ruled by priests. I think 'cause that's how I think it started out. All the early city-states were based off of an early town that grew on an early religious centre that developed farming by accident. So say Lagash, Uruk, blah blah blah. So it all started because they originally started out ruled by priests. Eventually, that changed. As each one spreads out from their centre, they start bumping into each other and they start fighting. And then after they start fighting, it comes you get your priests and your military people, and then eventually over time, the military people become dominant. But I think that's why they start out as the early civilizations at the very beginning. It sort of started out as religious centres. And the other point, of course, is this can only work in places where you can grow crops. So you start off in the southern part of Mesopotamia and Sumeria, and then later it spreads a bit north, into the upper regions. But it can't do it here. It can't spread into Saudi Arabia, or not Saudi Arabia. They can't spread into I'll call it Saudi Arabia now, or it can't spread into the Zagros Mountains or these Taurus Mountains, because it's not suitable. You've got the desert and these heavy high mountains. I mean, in the mountains, you probably could grow some wheat, but just not enough to support cities. So so that's the main thing. I think one, they started off by accident in the religious centre of particular tribes, and those religious centres then started farming by accident, and then they developed into city states again, more or less by accident. And then they started expanding out and fighting each other, and that's how you get Sumeria. And then from from about 10,000 years ago, when it started in Mesopotamia, it gradually spreads out, but it's much more latitudinal at the beginning. So 10,000 years there, then it sort of spreads out across the Mediterranean, roughly that same sort of latitude. Over the islands, Cyprus, Crete, Sicily, Sardinia, what's that called? I forgot what it's called. And then to there, so like about 10,000 years ago, 6,000 years ago, 5,000 years ago, whatever. So it spreads. It's faster east to west, and then slower going up north. So, recap. The Earth gradually got warmer from 16 to 24,000 years ago, from the last ice age. Getting gradually warmer over time. Then around 10,000 years ago, it got just warm enough for certain spots to develop plants which could become crops, so like wheat. And at first they're just hunter-gatherers, gathering the seeds for, and taking it home and making whatever out of it when they got back. But they also had these little tribes who used to have a religious centre. It's very old in this example, but you see the same thing later on in the further north, with the Samnites or the hill forts in Britain, where they weren't towns. People didn't live there most of the time. They were just a kind of tribal centre. And so you got the world getting warmer, and you've got these tribes with their tribal centres. They're hunter-gatherers, but they have a tribal centre for religious ceremonies and such. And then in places where they had wild seeds were native, they go for their religious ceremonies at the holy site, and they kind of put out all the wheat seeds into the various latrines in the holy site, and they turn the holy site into a giant farm, basically by accident. And then some priests or whatever show up, decide to stay there because they can. They don't need to. They got a plentiful supply of food, thanks to all these wheat seeds. And those first sort of holy sites, they turn into the first city states. At first, city state, being like probably like a wooden temple or something, and a little hut, And it turns into the equivalent of similar like a monastery in medieval monastery. And various artisans go there to help build stuff for the temple. Kind of brickmakers and potters and blacksmiths. And it turns into the town and into first city states. So you have the same, the thing with the big holy site in the middle, and as farming develops, all those little hunter-gatherer clans, semi-nomadic hunter-gatherer clans around the edge, they all turn into farming villages. And so and you start expanding outwards until they start bumping into other ones and they start fighting. And as an aside, it's trying to I wonder if that's how pantheons came about. That each of these tribes had their own god, and as they expand out and start fighting each other, and the bigger ones win over the smaller ones, that that's how the winner has their chief god, and then the pantheon is made up of all the other towns and city states they conquered along the way. That's a random thought there. But anyway, so that's the key to it. So one is farming was a natural development. Once it got warm enough, it started. It could only start in places that had a wild plant which was suitable, like wheat. I think it started by accident when people moved to their holy sites for festivals, and that's why in the early phases of civilization there's nearly always priests. It wasn't kings as much as or warriors. It was priests who ran it all, and it was later on once they all started spreading out, becoming big enough to start bordering each other and fighting each other all the time. That's when kings came along. First of all, King pharaohs are a good example of the state where they're half and half, where they're priest kings, and then after that it just become kings. I think that's that. Okay, to a bit.